Hi everyone, thanks for making the left turn for today, Saturday, October 17th, 2015. I'm George Farrar. Welcome back to the Jacksonville channel and welcome back to our continuing series, History Jacksonville. Excellent weather, filming season here on the leftturnetwork.com is back. We've got a lot planned. I've got so much to talk about this amazing building behind me, the Universal Marion Building, built in the early 1960s. It's classic, groovy 1960s architecture back in the day. And at the top of this building, on the 18th floor, in the 1960s, you could have a meal in a rotating restaurant, which was called the Embers restaurant, and it was really something else from what I hear. It was called the largest rotating restaurant in the world at the time. And it said that it would rotate a complete circle in an hour and a half. So let's talk a little bit more about what is now the JEA headquarters. Talk about this illustrious history that we have here, right here on the corner of Main Street and Church Street. So let's take a look, shall we? You know, as a child, this building captured my imagination. You'll see more later in the show of what the revolving restaurant looked like. It's now currently the conference room, the big conference room for the Jacksonville Electric Authority. So it really captured my imagination. It really got me thinking, and I must have driven my father nuts back in the day when I was a youngster, because we would drive through town and I would see a large skyscraper and say, "Hey Dad, why can't we go up to the top? Let's go up to the top. Let's go up to the top of these buildings." So, you know, something else. Now, this is what I would call classic well, you could almost say late 1950s, early 1960s architecture, built in 1962. It was opened in 1963. It was built for a company called the Universal Marion Company. And, you know, back when newspapers were really big, you know, before smartphones, before what we now know as the internet, to get news, and before cable television, newspapers were really big. People read the paper and regularly. And so this company owned newspapers. They also financed movies. They financed Woody Allen's movie Take the Money and Run. They also co-financed The Producers, which was a Mel Brooks movie. Now, the owner of Universal Marion was a man named Louis Wolfson. I'm sure the Wolfson name is familiar. Wolfson High School, Wolfson, the old Wolfson Park, and those were the baseball park where the baseball grounds is now, was built by Sam Wolfson, Louis's brother. And the high school is named after Louis's brother, Sam Wolfson. And, you know, Wolfson's Children's Hospital, all those different things. Now, Louis Wolfson was a unique man of his time, because they say he was one of the first corporate raiders. He liked to buy businesses, take them over, and do what he wanted with them. So he had to have a headquarters for all of his businesses. So thus, here's what we have today. Aren't the windows really neat? Look at the windows. Isn't that something else? Each of them rather unique. I mean, unique in the sense of the design of those windows. Each of them identical, of course. So, also at the time that it was opened, the offices of the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, were there, and so there were also law offices, insurance offices, and, you know, we talked about the restaurant. Let's talk a little bit more about what happened going into the 1970s. Now, in the early 1970s, things were changing downtown. The revolving restaurant, the mechanism on the revolving restaurant broke. The people that worked there had said that there were issues with silverware falling into the mechanism. The parts would have to be replaced. It became a lot more of an issue later on. And so finally, the rotating mechanism really got to the point where it just wasn't feasible to continue to repair it. The restaurant closed, and then briefly, for a period of time in the 1970s, there was a gay nightclub called Close Encounters. Now, in the 1970s, there's this company called Charter. Charter Oil. In the 1970s, the price of oil, gas, was going sky high. And Charter Oil was making a ton of money, and for a while, this was their headquarters. And there was a man named Raymond Mason, a legend from what I read. He had a castle in Ireland. He was getting his hands in businesses all over the place. Banking, mortgage. A lot of the profits came from oil. All sorts of stuff was going on. They were investing in offshore power systems. For a while, it was thought that offshore power platforms off the North Florida coast was going to be a big business. They made a lot of profits in the early 70s and a boatload of oil profits in 1979. But then, in the early 1980s, the price of oil, gas started to drop, and 80% of the revenues was oil. They tried to diversify, and then they lost their executives, some of their top executives, in a crash, a helicopter crash, going from Mr. Mason's Ireland Castle to the Shannon Airport. I do remember hearing about it at the time, and I do remember when this was considered the Charter Building. In the early mid-80s. The company went bankrupt. They were at one point going to have a role in part of what we now know as the AT&T building, built as the Southern Bell building, later Bell South, now AT&T over that way. So it's really something else. It's funny how things change, and then of course in the late 80s, the Jacksonville Electric Authority purchased this building, and it has since been their headquarters. Now, they're spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on renovations and studying not only, they're doing the renovations, but not only that, they're studying whether they're going to go ahead and get a new headquarters. I don't talk a lot about politics and a lot of these kinds of things in History Jacksonville, but I will suffice it to say that in the history of George Farrar, when it comes to power at my house, power's been flickering. It's been flickering a lot. I've had some very inconvenient power outages, including showering by candlelight back in August. It is something that I think that Jacksonville Electric Authority needs to work on the west side, so maybe the $400,000 in renovations on the 14th floor of this building, they could look at what they're actually doing. They self-admitted to admit that they have not maintained the interior of this building, plumbing, elevators. They got problems here. It's an old building, and like with old buildings, old houses, you got to keep things up. So that's where I think about things. Mayor Curry's really got him on the run. He's asked for resignations of mayoral appointees on the Jacksonville Electric Authority. So lots going on. They really need to get back to their core business, getting focused on keeping a steady stream of power to my house. So while they worry about power plays and renovations downtown, my hope is that I don't have to shower by candlelight unless it's something more romantic than getting ready to go to work. Okay, so I'm not done yet. I am not done yet. We're going to talk about Ivey's. We're going to do that further down the street. And we'll talk a little bit about downtown as I remembered it years ago. And of course, stay tuned. Got more pictures and film coming at you. You wouldn't really know it based on what you see today here. The Jacksonville Electric Authority Customer Center is not exactly a big hotbed of activity on a Saturday because, of course, they're closed here, this location. But back in the 1960s, 1970s, and early 1980s, this was the shopping district, right across the street from there was what we now, of course, have as our city hall was May Cohens, and before that it was Cohen Brothers, the big store. The architecture designed by Henry J. Clutho. So this was a shopping district, and as you look over here, this was, starting in the 1960s through the early 80s, was the Ivey's department store. It was part of the Universal Marion Plaza, and I have a special memory about Ivey's. Maybe it was just because I was 7 years old at the time, but whenever I walked into Ivey's, or Furchigets for that matter, the Ivey's location here and at the mall, with my mother, Martha, somehow I felt like I was worth $1 million. I don't know what it was. Early 80s shopping. My mother loved to shop. She loved to shop over at Regency. She loved to shop down here. Spent a lot of time over at Regency at the Woolworths restaurant. And so every once in a while we'd come down here and we would check out some of the different stores at that time that were only a year or two from closing. I was young, don't remember a lot, but I do remember Ivey's. So it was a department store, and if you notice, and now it's, it was bought out in 1989, 1990 by Dillard's. So what you notice, one thing distinctive about this building is that it presents mostly, with the exception of these windows here, a rather brick, essentially just presents brick, lots and lots of brick. Back in the day, there were display windows where we see windows today, displays. And of these, the one tradition that's been kept forward, I see on this building, were the overhangs that are still here, and they're green. It's something, as we watch things change, we don't know what exactly is going to happen with the JEA, and there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in renovations and the consultant study of where they're going to move to, if and when they move, and all of that stuff. So we don't know what the future of this building and the tower will be. It's entirely conceivable that we may be looking at one day a demolition, but at least we can talk about the way things were, the way things are, and kind of enjoy what we have and celebrate for the day. And as you can see just down the way, First Baptist Church. So it's that time again. It's the time that I most enjoy, and I know you most enjoy too. I'm going to roll some pictures, and I'm going to roll some film. So it's time to do it, so I'm going to just say it. Let's roll it.